So good morning, Attorney Griggs.
Good morning, brother. How you doing?
I am well, man. It seems like every week we're on this
Every,
justice.
every week there's something going on in the state of Georgia, and we always have to talk about it and do something about it.
Absolutely. So let's get right into this. The situation going on with Fulton County Jail on Rice Street. Those of us who are local, we already know what it is. And even Sheriff Patrick Labat says that this has been a humanitarian issue for quite some time. So this is nothing new. But now what is new is the fact that the Department of Justice is launching its investigation into the jail. How does that affect the jail, and how has your office been involved in that inquiry?
Well, we've been advocating for changes at the jail for almost a decade, in some form or fashion, either through the practice of law or through my engagement with the NAACP, both the Atlanta chapter and the Georgia State Conference. And so when we found out what happened to LaShawn Thompson, we elevated it to a next step. And the Department of Justice heard us, and Kristen Clark announced yesterday that the Department of Justice will be opening a patterns and practice investigation into the Fulton County Jail. And it's definitely necessary. The Fulton County Jail was under a federal consent decree for almost a decade and came out from under that, and the conditions still didn't get any better. So it's time for, the Department of Justice to look into either civil issues or criminal issues, but they're looking at a host of things to investigate, including the conditions, the use of force, the neglect of individual mental health issues. And so it's a host of issues they're looking into, and it's necessary for anybody who knows anything about Fulton County Detention Center. It's time for change there immediately.
There's a lot to unpack here. So let's go into one just last week, or maybe this week, I'm not quite certain. Young 19-year-old female was held in the city jail and was pronounced dead. Yes. Not quite certain what the circumstances are surrounding that death, but how does that death correlate to what's going on in Fulton County Jail?
Well, I know of at least 12 in custody deaths, either in the custody of the sheriff's department or in facilities that are being leased to the sheriff's department. And that's disturbing, to say the least. And this new case from the Atlanta Detention Center, which is renting space to the sheriff's department because of the overcrowding, it just adds additional concern. But one death is too many, whether it's Antonio May or LaShawn Thompson or this young lady, is one too many. And so it comes at a time when people are looking to answers for what's happening. And my prayers go out to her family. I want to know more about what happened and get to the bottom of what happened. But it's a problem that continues to rise with the in custody issues at the jail and the detention centers that are run by the sheriff's department. So it's time for federal oversight, and that's what the Department of Justice is going to do.
So there's a couple of things I want to unpack here. First of all, when one is arrested and charged with a crime and they're in a detention center, they have not been charged. Well, they haven't been convicted of a crime, but just charged and waiting for either bail or trial or whatever. What are their rights as it relates to this human rights at that point?
They have all of their constitutional rights. And that's what people need to understand. These are pretrial detention facilities, which means that they have all of their constitutional rights. They have not been convicted of a crime. They've merely been accused. And so to hold individuals and not take care of their health needs, their food, and all those things could potentially rise to a criminal offense. And it also will arise to a violation of civil law, both federal and local. So there are a host of issues, but everyone that's in a pretrial detention facility, if they have not been convicted of a crime, have all of their civil rights.
Now, I guess there is a difference. Once you're convicted, you do lose some of your rights. Talk to us about the difference.
Yeah, so the difference is once you've been convicted of a felony, you lose some of your rights, including your right to vote, right to possess a firearm, right to be free, in some cases when you're sentenced to a penitentiary sentence or some in custody sentence, but you still have your basic civil rights, the right to life, liberty, and some pursuit of happiness. Of course, everybody's not happy when they're in custody, but you still have some basic civil rights. But here's the thing with regard to the pretrial detention centers. Everyone has their constitutional rights. And these are not just the constitutional rights we're talking about. We're talking about morality and human rights. No one should be forced to live in unsanitary conditions, to be subjected to insect infestations and the things that we're hearing about, to be subjected to lack of medical treatment. These are all the things that we're hearing allegations of. And this is the reason why Department of Justice is stepping in to look into those things. But yes, when you are convicted of a crime, you do lose some of your civil rights.
So we were at the steps of the Capitol about a month ago in regards to LaShawn Thompson's death. Attorney Ben Crump came out, and Attorney Harper, of course, yourself, and many other civil rights leaders were there to talk about the horrendous death of Mr. Thompson, and the fact that this was probably one of the worst and most horrific deaths in the country as it relates to someone dying in jail with these type of circumstances. What is the problem over there? Is it finances? Is it incompetence? What is it?
I'm not sure. And I think that's why we need an outside agency to step in. For somebody to be subjected to the conditions that LaShawn Thompson was living in that ultimately caused his death, and it was ruled a homicide, somebody needs to be held accountable. Now, we know that 3 of the jail staff have resigned, but it needs to be more than that. And of course, that's what the Department of Justice will be looking into. But the short answer to your question is I'm not sure. It's either negligence, criminal negligence, or intentional acts that are occurring, all of which, if are found, are violations of either civil law or criminal law.
Now, I saw something, and I know you saw it too, where one inmate dug a hole. He was in his cell, dug a hole in the wall to get to the cell next to him just to stab somebody. How in the world does that happen in any prison system, jail system in the country? How does that occur?
I'm not sure. I mean, in order to burrow through a prison wall, that would cause a lot of disturbance. It would be very loud. People would know. And that shows the level of dysfunction that's happening right now. There's also been issues when people are flying drones up to the 6th and 7th floor and getting contraband in. And there have been individuals now who've been charged with giving contraband items. These are detention officers giving contraband items to the inmates and having sexual relations with inmates. It's a lot going on over there at the jail, and it needs to be investigated, because if this is happening and the command staff knows about it or should know about it, there are some serious issues there.
I've never heard anything like this. And it's unfortunate, because for the most part, most of the people who run that jail look like us.
Yes.
And it creates this narrative that we, and I say we because we both are people of color, are incompetent. And that and I've heard that from my white counterparts, that, what in the hell is going on with you all over there in Fulton County? That kind of talk. And so what affects one affects all of us, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, let's be clear. The same issues are occurring in the Department of Corrections and other jails that are not run by minority individuals. This is a systemic problem. It's underfunding, it's neglect. It's a consideration that we can arrest our way out of a problem, but not fund the system appropriately to make sure people's lives are protected, that people's rights are protected. So I push back a lot on that, simply because Fulton County is not the only county that has jail issues. I've heard of jail issues in Clayton County, in Bibb County, in Lowndes County. There are a lot of county detention centers that are not fully funded, are not fully operated according to the standards that are necessary. I mean, Camden County, you see almost every other week a jail deputy, assaulting individuals. So I push back on that a lot. What I would say is the state of Georgia is not fully funding the mental health services. It's a shame that the Fulton County Detention Center is the largest mental health provider in the Southeast. So if we want majority communities to weigh in on this, they need to talk to the governor about fully funding our mental health services separate and apart from the carceral state.
Well, hopefully with this new investigation, that will come up. And now that we have the federal spotlight on this situation, some changes will happen. Because again, we in Atlanta, we've known about these problems for quite some time, funding and the like. How does your office monitor what's going on? How do you keep us informed? Because again, we don't always get what's happening until after it happens. But how do we get real-time information as to what's going on with this case?
Well, you can always stay connected with the Georgia State Conference and the Atlanta NAACP on all platforms, especially YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. At Attorney Gerald Griggs, at Attorney Griggs on all platforms, at the Georgia NAACP, and at the Atlanta NAACP on all platforms. But more importantly, you can join a local unit. I get calls every single day from units as far as Camden County about issues with police brutality and police accountability and jail conditions and prison conditions. So that's one way. But we will continue to bring information to you on your platform and other platforms to make sure people are aware of, one, what's happening, and two, what they can do to remedy the problem. Of course, we were in direct contact with the Department of Justice after the press conferences that we had on LaShawn Thompson, strongly urging them to get involved. And ultimately, as you've seen from Merrick Garland and Kristen Clark, they are now involved. But I want the rest of Georgia to understand that the problems at the Fulton County Jail are not unique. There are problems at pretrial detention centers across the state. And if you're in a location where there are problems, please reach out to the Georgia State Conference. We will investigate. And if we find issues, we will pass them on to the appropriate law enforcement agencies that are independent from that particular pretrial detention center.
Well, Attorney Griggs, as I said to you earlier on, this is something that we may have to do every week because there's always a new issue. There's always something going on, unfortunately. And we appreciate your fight and your stick-to-itiveness to fighting justice in the civil rights capital of the world, Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, and I appreciate you opening the platform. As we've said before, this is the birthplace of civil rights, and I would argue it's becoming the birthplace of social justice. And we have to make sure that we man the gate and make sure that we don't take one step back. And that's the purpose of the Georgia State Conference. We've been doing this in Georgia almost 100 years. We've been doing it nationally for 114 years. We're going up to Boston the end of the month for our national convention. And our theme is thriving. And in order for us to continue to thrive, we have to push the needle. We have to speak truth to power and call people out if there are violations of the law, violations of people's civil rights. And we will continue to do that at the Georgia State Conference because we are moving forward.
All right, my brother. Well, continue keeping up the good fight. And as you know, this platform is always open to you. And we look forward to seeing you on the next issue.
Thank you, my brother.
All right. Thank you. Be well.